Plus, my name is Margot Chen. I'm 71 years old. And on the morning my late husband's will was unveiled, I watched my two daughters carve up $45 million like it was their birthday cake. Victoria claimed the tech startup portfolio. Natasha inherited the vineyard estates, the penthouse suites, the yacht, the art collection, everything of tangible beauty. Absolutely everything. And I, after 48 years of unwavering partnership, after reshaping my entire existence around that family, was handed a tattered manila folder that looked like something pulled from a dumpster. My son-in-law Marcus actually snickered and said, "Well, Margot, at least you can use it to organize your coupon clippings." Victoria wouldn't even meet my gaze. Natasha exhaled like my mere presence exhausted her. Crushed and hollow, I left that glass-walled conference room, feeling like every sacrifice I'd made had amounted to nothing. But what none of them could have predicted was that later that evening, when I finally opened that despised folder in the quiet of my own apartment, I would discover something that would flip their world upside down and redefine mine forever. Richard had passed away only 9 days prior. A sudden stroke took him in a matter of hours. For 48 years he had been my anchor, my confidant, the visionary who transformed a failing software consultancy into a global enterprise, working around the clock. I was there beside him every step of the way. When he pulled all-nighters coding prototypes, I brought him espresso and kept him company until sunrise. When he traveled internationally for investor meetings for months at a time, I handled our household solo and raised our two daughters without a single complaint. When venture capitalists turned him down cold, I sold the pearl necklace my grandmother had left me to help him secure seed funding. I never sought applause. I never demanded acknowledgement. I simply loved my husband and believed he would protect me when it mattered most. How utterly mistaken I was. The will reading happened at the offices of Hamilton and Strauss, the corporate attorneys who'd handled Richard's affairs for decades. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing my navy silk blouse, the one Richard had surprised me with on our last Valentine's Day together. I assumed this would be straightforward. After nearly 5 decades side by side, it seemed logical that my husband would have ensured my security. My daughters could inherit the empire, but surely I would have enough to live comfortably and independently. Claire Hamilton, the lead attorney, started reading in a flat business-like tone. To my daughter Victoria Chen Galloway, I bequeath the technology portfolio valued at $22 million. Victoria grinned like she'd just won the lottery. To my daughter, Natasha Chen Alvarez, I leave the vineyard properties generating $11 million annually, plus the penthouse collection. Natasha settled deeper into her leather chair, satisfaction radiating from her. The coastal estates, the yacht moored in Monaco, the modern art pieces, the offshore accounts. Everything was distributed between them, like treasure divided among pirates. $45 million split down the middle, while I sat there, a ghost in the room, waiting to hear my name called. When Claire finally finished the seemingly endless inventory of assets my daughters were claiming, she hesitated. She glanced at a separate document and said, "For Mrs. Margot Chen." My pulse quickened. At last, I was about to learn what the love of my life had set aside for me. Claire continued, "I leave her this personal folder," and she slid across the polished table a faded manila folder that looked like it had been shoved into storage decades ago and forgotten. I accepted it with shaking hands, while my daughters exchanged triumphant looks. Marcus, my son-in-law, couldn't suppress his laughter. "Well, Margot, at least you can use it to organize your coupon clippings." Victoria didn't even glance up from the asset sheets she was scanning. Natasha sighed heavily, as though my existence was an inconvenience she had to endure. The folder felt almost weightless in my grip. It seemed empty. It felt like mockery. Claire closed the will binder and pivoted toward my daughters to outline the legal steps required for them to assume ownership of their inheritances. They discussed wire instructions, property deeds, corporate restructuring, as if I weren't sitting right there, as if I were a phantom occupying that upholstered chair. I rose slowly, tucked the folder into my handbag, and moved toward the door. Nobody bid me farewell. Nobody asked if I needed assistance getting home. Nobody offered me a ride. I exited that steel and glass tower with a shattered heart, convinced that 48 years of devotion and sacrifice had been reduced to a tattered folder that likely held a sentimental note with zero real value. I wandered the streets of the city where I had spent my entire adult existence, where I had nurtured a family that now discarded me like trash, and I wept harder than I had since childhood. That night, seated in the study of my small apartment, with silence pressing down on me like a weight, I decided to open the folder. My hands trembled as I peeled back the worn slab. Inside was a single folded sheet of cream-colored paper. I unfolded it carefully and read the words penned in Richard's distinctive handwriting. Richard's script was unmistakable, that flowing penmanship I had seen in hundreds of love notes during our courtship, on anniversary cards, on messages he left on the refrigerator before heading to early meetings. But this time, the words I read stole the air from my lungs for the woman who truly saw me. Account number 7429 Delta Echo Hotel Foxtrot, Geneva Private Wealth Management, Switzerland. And beneath that, a line that made my entire body shake. What you discover here is merely the surface. They never deserved the whole truth, but you do. My heart pounded so violently, I thought it might crack a rib. A Swiss account. What was Richard talking about? For 48 years of marriage, he had shared everything about his ventures with me. Or so I believed. What secrets had he concealed? What truth had my daughters never earned the right to know? I stayed awake all night, tossing restlessly, clutching that paper to my chest like a lifeline. The following morning, I contacted the bank. My uncertain French was answered by a representative who spoke flawless English. I provided the account number, my identification details, and after a pause that felt eternal, I heard the words that altered my reality forever. Madam Chen, the current balance in your account is 137 million United States dollars. 137 million. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the kitchen tiles. 137 million. More than 3 times what my daughters had inherited combined. I sank to the floor, trembling, struggling to process what I had just been told. Richard had left me a hidden fortune, a fortune nobody knew existed, a fortune that made the 45 million from the official will look like pocket money. The representative continued, Madame, we also have instructions to courier a secure lockbox that your husband deposited with us 3 years ago. We can arrange delivery for tomorrow. A lockbox. What else had Richard kept hidden? What other revelations awaited me? I accepted the delivery and ended the call with unsteady hands. My mind whirled with questions. How had Richard amassed such wealth without my knowledge? Why had he kept it secret? Why had he chosen to leave it exclusively to me? And the question that haunted me most deeply, what truth had my daughters never deserved to know? The courier arrived the next afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock. It was a compact but heavy lockbox with a digital combination code, delivered in a sealed envelope. The numbers were our wedding date, August 9th, 1976. So typical of Richard. Ever the romantic, even in his most guarded secrets. I closed the blinds, silenced my phone, and sat before the lockbox with my heart hammering. I entered the code and heard the mechanism unlock with a soft click. Inside were files, photographs, recordings, and a thick envelope with my name written in bold letters. I opened it with trembling fingers and began reading the most shocking letter of my entire life. My dearest Margot. The letter opened. If you are reading this, it means I have departed this world and our daughters have revealed their true natures at the will reading. I know they humiliated you. I know they dismissed you like you were nothing. I know they laughed when you received that old folder. But I needed it to unfold this way. I needed them to expose who they truly are before you learned the full story. During the final 3 years of my life, I uncovered things about Victoria and Natasha that shattered my heart. Things that forced me to make choices I never wanted to face. The 137 million you found in the Swiss account represents only a portion of my actual wealth. There is more, far more. But before you understand everything, You must know the truth about our daughters." My world tilted. What truth? What had Richard uncovered? I kept reading, my soul bracing for impact. Victoria is not the tech genius she portrays herself to be. For 4 years, she has been embezzling funds from my company to finance her gambling addiction. She owes close to $3 million to illegal bookmakers who do not negotiate kindly. Marcus has no idea, but she has refinanced their home 3 times and is on the verge of foreclosure. The documentation proving all of this is in this box. I felt like I'd been struck in the chest. My elder daughter, who had always been my pride, was a compulsive gambler who had stolen from the family enterprise. But the letter continued, and what I read about Natasha was even more devastating. Natasha has a prescription drug dependency she has been concealing for 6 years. She has secretly liquidated 4 properties I gifted her to fund her habit. But the gravest issue is that she is entangled with suppliers who are extorting her. They have threatened her life, unless she pays them $800,000 by year's end. The proof of her debts and the photographs documenting her addiction are also in this box. Tears streamed down my face. How had I been so oblivious? How had I failed to notice my daughters destroying themselves? Richard's letter kept unraveling darker revelations. But what wounds me most profoundly, my love, is what they conspired to do to you. I overheard them speaking one evening in my office. They assumed I was unconscious from medication, but I caught every single word. Victoria told Natasha that once I died, they needed to eliminate you as swiftly as possible. Marcus suggested declaring you mentally unfit and committing you to a memory care facility. Natasha agreed it would be simple to find a physician willing to sign the required paperwork. They wanted to seize whatever inheritance you might receive and confine you somewhere you wouldn't interfere with their schemes. The paper grew damp from my tears. My own daughters, my own flesh and blood, had plotted to lock me away like a diseased animal to steal whatever I had. That is why I decided to shield you, Richard's letter went on. That is why I moved the bulk of my assets into accounts only you can access. That is why I allowed them the scraps from the public will while you control the real inheritance. The $137 million is just the beginning, my love. There are properties across Europe, investments in emerging Asian markets, accounts in secure jurisdictions. In total, more than $260 million that now belong to you. But I also leave you something more precious than money. The truth. And with that truth, the power to decide what becomes of our daughters. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the letter. $260 million, a fortune that rendered my daughter's official inheritance laughable. The letter concluded with a sentence that branded itself onto my heart. You choose whether to use this knowledge to protect yourself, or to teach them a lesson they will carry forever. I can no longer watch over you, but I have given you the tools to watch over yourself. With all my eternal devotion, Richard. I placed the letter on the table and examined the contents of the lockbox. Photographs of Natasha with dilated pupils, pill bottles scattered around her. Bank statements revealing Victoria's debts, contracts signed with dangerous loan sharks, audio files stored on small devices I didn't yet have the courage to play. My husband had become a private investigator during his final years, meticulously cataloguing the corruption of our own children. And now that explosive evidence was in my possession. I sat in that study for hours, surrounded by images that demolished the picture I had as my daughters. Natasha with vacant eyes, swallowing pills in a luxury hotel bathroom. Victoria signing contracts with men in dark clothing who were clearly not legitimate financiers. Casino receipts totaling tens of thousands of dollars. Pawn tickets for items I believed they still owned. My perfect world, my model family, was collapsing before me like a house built on sand. But what hurt the deepest wasn't the addictions or the debts. It was the plan they had devised to dispose of me. In one of the audio recordings I finally dared to listen to, I heard Marcus saying, "Once she's institutionalized, we can liquidate the family condo and divide the proceeds. She's an elderly woman. She won't even understand what's happening." And Victoria's response, "Mum was always so trusting. It'll be effortless to convince her it's in her best interest." Over the next several days, I immersed myself in examining every document Richard had left in that lockbox. He had hired professional investigators to surveil our daughters. He had captured phone conversations. He had photographed clandestine meetings. My husband had assembled a complete dossier on Victoria and Natasha's deceptions and betrayals. And among all those papers, I found something that sent ice through my veins: a signed agreement between my daughters and a specialized elder care corporation. They had already paid the deposit to commit me to a place called Maplewood Senior Residence, a private facility 4 hours outside the city. The contract was dated 11 days before Richard's stroke. They had planned to confine me before their father even passed. They had planned to rob me while I mourned at his memorial service. The phone rang one morning as I was reviewing investment portfolios. It was Victoria, using that artificial sweetness she deployed when she wanted something. "Mom, we need to have a conversation. Marcus and I are concerned about your well-being. You've been so withdrawn since the funeral." Concerned? The irony was suffocating. I told her I was managing, that I simply needed time to grieve. But she pressed on. "It's unhealthy for you to be isolated in that apartment. We've been exploring options to make you more comfortable." There it was. The scheme was already in motion. "What sort of options?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Well, there are some wonderful communities where you could have companionship, structured activities, round-the-clock medical support. Places where you wouldn't have to worry about daily responsibilities." Places like Maplewood Senior Residence, I thought. Feeling fury begin to simmer inside me. That same afternoon another call came, this time from Natasha. "Mom, Victoria mentioned you spoke earlier. I think it's a brilliant idea for you to consider relocating somewhere more appropriate for someone your age." Her voice sounded strained, rehearsed. "Besides," she continued, "we should discuss finances. Dad left you the condo, but maintaining it is incredibly expensive. The property taxes, the utilities, the repairs. It would make more sense to sell so you could live somewhere without those burdens." Selling the condo. Of course, that was part of the plan. Eliminate me and claim whatever they could. "I'm not rushing into any decisions," I replied. "We just said goodbye to your father." "But Mom," she insisted, "the longer you delay, the more complicated it becomes. At your age, transitions are difficult. It's wiser to act quickly." At my age, as if I were a senile old woman incapable of managing her own life. Over the following days, the pressure intensified. Victoria, Natasha, and Marcus took turns calling me, always with brochures for senior living communities and arguments about my safety and comfort. They began appearing at my apartment unannounced, always armed with glossy pamphlets and persuasive scripts. "Look at this place, Mom," Marcus would say, displaying photos of manicured gardens and recreation rooms. "They offer physical therapy, art workshops, day trips. You'd thrive there." But I had researched that facility. It was a gilded prison where families deposited inconvenient elders and erased them from memory. The online testimonials spoke of inadequate care, inedible food, and abusive staff members. A perfect location for someone to fade away from the world, unnoticed. One evening, while pretending to entertain their suggestions, I decided to test them. "You know what?" I said during an awkward family dinner they had organized. "Maybe you're right. Perhaps it is time to make some changes. But first, I'd appreciate your help with something." Their faces brightened, convinced I had surrendered. "Absolutely, Mum. Whatever you need," Victoria said with a manufactured smile. "I want to review all of your father's company records. I want to understand precisely what you've inherited and how the operations function." The silence that followed was profound. Victoria and Natasha exchanged uneasy glances. "Don't burden yourself with that, Mum," Natasha said hastily. "You don't need to stress over paperwork." "But I insist," I continued. "After 48 years of building that empire alongside your father, I have every right to understand what happens to it." Marcus interjected with that patronizing grin I despised. "Margot, those things are incredibly complex. Financial models, regulatory filings, corporate structures. It's better to let the professionals manage it while you enjoy your new living situation. The professionals? As if I were a child incapable of understanding basic finance. Also, Victoria added, we've already made some critical decisions. We sold one of the vineyard properties to cover company obligations. Sold a property? What obligations? Richard had been gone barely 2 weeks, and they were already liquidating assets. What kind of obligations? I pressed. Tedious things, Mom. Tax liabilities, vendor contracts, employee salaries. Nothing for you to worry about. But I knew the reality. I knew Victoria had used that money to pay her bookmakers. I knew they were plundering the inheritance to fund their addictions. That night, alone in my apartment, I made a decision. I would not be the silent victim they anticipated. I would not allow them to institutionalize me while they ransacked everything Richard and I had built together. I had $260 million. I had proof of their crimes. And I had something they had gravely underestimated. 48 years of experience as the partner of a brilliant entrepreneur. I had absorbed more knowledge than they realized. I had learned more strategy than they imagined. And now it was time to deploy all of it to my advantage. I picked up my phone and called Geneva Private Wealth Management. It was time to begin moving my pieces in this lethal chess match my own daughters had initiated. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community, so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The next morning, as I was sipping green tea, my doorbell chimed. It was a distinguished older gentleman who introduced himself as Bernard Whitmore, an attorney. Mrs. Chen, I'm here on behalf of your late husband. I have specific instructions to execute. Richard had hired independent counsel, separate from Hamilton and Strauss, to manage his confidential affairs. Bernard handed me a thick portfolio filled with legal instruments. Your husband requested I deliver this to you precisely 2 weeks after his passing. These are powers of attorney, corporate resolutions, and authorities that grant you complete control over all his enterprises if you choose to exercise them. Complete control. Richard hadn't merely left me money, he had handed me the keys to the entire kingdom. Your daughters are unaware these documents exist. According to your husband's directives, you possess the authority to nullify their inheritances if you determine they are violating the family's ethical standards. Bernard Whitmore settled into my living room and began explaining documents that seemed straight out of an espionage thriller. Your husband was extraordinarily meticulous, Mrs. Chen. These agreements grant you 62% of the voting shares in all the family businesses. On paper, your daughters inherited operational control, but legally, you are the controlling shareholder. My head spun as I tried to absorb the information. How is that even possible? The will Claire read was explicit. That will, Bernard interrupted, addressed only the visible assets. Your husband created an intricate corporate architecture where the companies operate under the umbrella of a family trust. Chen are the sole trustee of that entity. Richard had been playing three-dimensional chess while everyone else thought we were playing checkers. He had constructed a perfect legal snare disguised as a generous bequest to his daughters. But there's additional information, Bernard continued, opening another folder. Your husband also commissioned me to investigate your daughter's activities over the past 4 years. What we discovered is sufficient to completely void their inheritances, and, in certain instances, to initiate criminal charges. He showed me photographs I had already seen in the lockbox, but also new evidence, suspicious wire transfers, falsified invoices, fraudulent expense reports. Victoria has been diverting company resources to settle gambling debts. In total, she has misappropriated nearly $4 million. Natasha has been using corporate vehicles and facilities to support her prescription drug dependency, effectively turning the family vineyards into fronts for illegal activity. Each disclosure felt like a hammer blow to my chest. How had I raised 2 criminals without realizing it? Bernard produced an audio player and pressed play. I instantly recognized my daughter's voices. When the old woman is locked away, Victoria was saying, we can liquidate all remaining assets and relocate overseas. With 60 million each, we can rebuild our lives in Europe. Natasha's voice responded, agreed, but we need to move fast. The suppliers are demanding payment. If I don't settle my account soon, they've threatened violence. Don't worry, Victoria continued. Within 3 weeks, Mum will be institutionalized and will have access to everything. Hamilton has already drafted the incapacity documents. They weren't just planning to steal from me. They were planning to flee the country after destroying everything Richard had created. Your husband recorded this conversation 4 weeks before his stroke, Bernard explained. That's why he expedited all the legal preparations. He knew his time was limited and he needed to protect you. He handed me a specialized mobile device. This phone is linked directly to my office and to law enforcement. If you feel threatened at any moment, press the red button, and assistance will be dispatched immediately. The gravity of my situation began to sink in. I wasn't simply dealing with ungrateful children, I was confronting desperate criminals who viewed my disappearance as the solution to all their problems. What would you recommend I do? I asked him. Bernard smiled, though the expression didn't reach his eyes. Your husband asked me to relay this message, verbatim. Margot, you are stronger and more capable than they comprehend. It's time they discovered who they're really dealing with. That night after Bernard departed, I sat before my vanity mirror and truly studied myself for the first time in months. I saw a 71-year-old woman with silver hair I had allowed to grow naturally, with lines etched across my face that chronicled decades of joy and sorrow. But I also saw something I had forgotten existed: determination, fierceness, fire. For all those years of being the devoted wife, the selfless mother, I had buried the fighter I had been in my younger days. The woman who had sold her heirloom pearls to help Richard launch his startup. The woman who had worked double shifts when finances were tight. The woman who had negotiated with banks, suppliers, and competitors to defend her family. That woman was still inside me, dormant but not deceased, and it was time to awaken her. The next day, I launched my counteroffensive. First, I transferred $15 million to a domestic account. I needed immediate liquidity for what I had planned. Next, I hired a private security company to monitor my apartment 24 hours a day. If my daughters intended to accelerate my institutionalization, they would encounter far more resistance than they anticipated. I also retained a forensic accountant to audit all the family enterprises. I wanted official documentation of every dollar they had stolen. Finally, I consulted with 4 different criminal defense attorneys and provided them copies of all the evidence I possessed against Victoria and Natasha. I wanted to be prepared for every possible scenario. Victoria appeared at my apartment unannounced on Friday afternoon. She was accompanied by Marcus and a man who introduced himself as Dr.
Sullivan, a geriatric psychiatrist. The trap was being set. "Mom," Victoria said with that counterfeit smile that now revolted me. "We brought the doctor to conduct a general wellness assessment.
We simply want to ensure you're healthy." The supposed doctor carried a leather briefcase and a condescending demeanor that made my blood boil. "I don't require an assessment," I replied firmly. "I feel perfectly healthy." "But Mum," Marcus insisted, "at your age, regular evaluations are essential. The doctor just wants to ask you some basic questions." Basic questions designed to declare someone mentally incompetent, I thought. "Mrs. Chen," the fake doctor said in a syrupy tone, "I simply need to evaluate your cognitive function. These are standard procedures." He extracted some forms from his briefcase that I recognized instantly. They were identical to the documents Bernard had shown me, the ones Hamilton and Strauss had prepared to declare me incapacitated. "Can you tell me today's date?" he asked. "Friday, August 23rd, I replied. "And can you tell me your current address?" "The condominium I purchased with my husband 32 years ago at 417 Lakeshore Boulevard." "Do you recall what you inherited in the will?" There was the snare. If I mentioned only receiving the old folder, it would suggest I had no resources and would be easier to declare incompetent. If I mentioned the $260 million, they would assume I was delusional. "I remember perfectly," I replied. looking directly into Victoria's eyes, that you inherited 45 million in companies and properties. I also remember that I received a folder you considered worthless. The doctor scribbled something on his forms. Victoria smiled, believing I had fallen into her trap. And how do you feel about that distribution? The doctor probed. I feel, I said slowly, like a woman who finally understands exactly who her family members truly are. Marcus and Victoria exchanged satisfied glances. They assumed I was admitting confusion or bitterness, emotions they could exploit to justify my commitment. The fake doctor closed his folder and whispered something to Victoria. Then he turned to me. Mrs. Chen, I believe it would be beneficial for you to spend several days under clinical observation. We have an excellent facility where you can rest while we conduct a thorough evaluation. There it was, the final trap. No thank you, I replied with the firmest voice I could summon. I feel perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. But Mom, Victoria said, and for the first time, there was an unmistakable note of menace in her tone. This isn't a request. The doctor believes you require specialized care. The doctor, I replied, rising slowly, can believe whatever he wishes, but this is my home, and I decide who enters and who leaves. At that moment, Marcus made the error I had been anticipating. He stepped toward me with that venomous smile and said, Margot, don't make this difficult. We all understand you can't take care of yourself anymore. It's time you accept reality and let the adults make the important choices. The adults, as if I were a child, as if 48 years of marriage and empire building had taught me nothing about life and power. I looked at Victoria, at Marcus, at the fraudulent doctor, and I smiled for the first time in weeks. It was a smile they had never witnessed before, a smile that would have made Richard proud. And that's precisely what I'm about to do. I removed my phone, the one Bernard had given me, and activated the recording function. I want to be completely clear about what is transpiring here, I said in a steady voice as I recorded them. My daughter Victoria, my son-in-law Marcus, and this supposed psychiatrist are attempting to force me into a facility against my will. The fake doctor immediately grew agitated. Ma'am, this is merely a routine medical evaluation. Routine? I responded, keeping the phone aimed at them. Is it routine to arrive at my home unannounced? Is it routine to bring commitment paperwork already completed? Is it routine to conspire to institutionalize someone to steal their assets? Victoria tried to grab the phone from me. Mom, put that away. You're behaving irrationally. On the contrary, I said, stepping back. I'm behaving exactly as a woman should, who discovered her own family plotting to confine her, to steal her inheritance. Victoria's expression transformed completely. The mask of the concerned daughter fell away, and for the first time, I saw her authentic face. Cold, calculating, ruthless. We don't know what you're talking about, Marcus stammered, but his voice wavered. I'm talking, I continued, pulling one of the photographs Richard had left in the lockbox from my purse, about this. It was an image of Victoria exiting an underground gambling den at 4 a.m, visibly intoxicated, flanked by two men who were obviously not legitimate business people. I'm talking about the gambling debts. I'm talking about the money embezzled from the company. I'm talking about the contract you already executed with Maplewood to have me committed. The silence that followed was deafening. The fake doctor started backing toward the exit. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I should leave. Not so quickly, doctor, I said, blocking his path. How much did they pay you to sign fraudulent incapacity documents? The man went pale. I don't know what you're referring to. I'm referring to this, I said, showing him another photograph where he appeared accepting an envelope of cash from Victoria. My husband hired professional investigators during his final months. He documented every corrupt move you made. Marcus began to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of pure terror. Margot, you're misunderstanding everything. Everything we've done has been for your benefit. For my benefit, I repeated, feeling rage fuel a strength I hadn't experienced in years. Stealing from the family business is for my benefit? Planning to flee overseas with the money is for my benefit? Victoria finally lost her composure. Enough. You're a delusional old woman who doesn't comprehend what she's saying. Dad made an error leaving you anything. You're too incompetent to handle wealth. There it was, the truth. After 48 years of pretending to respect me, she finally revealed what she genuinely thought. Incompetent, I asked, removing my phone and dialing a number. They're here, exactly as you predicted. Yes, I've recorded everything. Victoria tried to snatch the phone from me again, but this time I didn't retreat. If you touch me, I said, in a voice I didn't recognize as my own, it will be the final act you commit as a free woman. What do you mean? Marcus asked, his voice fracturing. I mean, I replied, that at this very moment, 4 criminal attorneys are reviewing evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was 2 police officers, accompanied by Bernard. Mrs. Chen, one of the officers said, we received your emergency alert. Victoria and Marcus looked at each other in absolute horror. The fake doctor attempted to slip away, but Bernard stopped him. Dr. Sullivan, or should I say Mr. Peterson, because you're not actually a licensed psychiatrist, are you? The man collapsed into a chair. They paid me $8,000 to sign some documents. I didn't realize it was illegal. $8,000 to declare me mentally incompetent, I said. Is that what my freedom is worth? The police began taking statements, while Bernard explained to me that this had been a controlled operation from the moment Richard died. Your husband anticipated every move, Bernard told me, as the officers detained the fake doctor. He knew they would attempt to have you committed swiftly, before you could defend yourself. That's why he prepared all this evidence and these legal instruments. Victoria and Marcus weren't arrested that day, but the police cautioned them they were under active investigation. When they finally departed, my apartment fell silent for the first time in weeks. I sank into my favorite armchair, the same one where Richard and I used to watch documentaries together, and I wept. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of emancipation. For the first time since my husband's death, I felt genuinely free. That night, I called both of my daughters. Not to plead or attempt to reconcile. I called them to deliver an ultimatum. You have 72 hours to return every penny you embezzled from the family businesses. You have 72 hours to cancel the agreement with Maplewood. And you have 72 hours to confess the complete truth about your debts and your addictions. Or what? Victoria asked, with a defiant tone that no longer intimidated me. Or Monday morning at 9 o'clock, 4 major newspapers will publish the full account of your crimes. Or I submit all the evidence to the district attorney's office. Or I invoke the legal powers your father left me to completely revoke your inheritances. The silence on the other end confirmed they finally grasped who they were confronting. Impossible, Natasha muttered. Dad left us everything in the will. You can't take what's legally ours. Want to test that theory? I replied, and for the first time in my life, my voice sounded exactly like Richard's when he was closing a high-stakes negotiation. Because it turns out your father was significantly more strategic than you imagined, and I'm considerably more formidable than you ever believed. I ended the call before they could respond. I didn't need to hear more lies, more excuses, more manipulation. It was time for them to learn that the woman they had underestimated for so many years had claws when she needed to use them. The next morning, at 7:30 sharp, Victoria and Natasha appeared at my door. They didn't arrive with fraudulent psychiatrists or commitment schemes. They came defeated, humiliated, pleading for leniency. Mom, Victoria said, and for the first time in years there was no condescension in her voice. We need to have a serious conversation. I permitted them entry, but this time I didn't offer tea or pleasantries. I left them standing in the center of the living room, while I remained seated in my armchair. The position of power I had earned. Speak, I said simply. Natasha began crying immediately. Mom, everything spiraled out of control. The pills, the debts, the suppliers. We didn't know how to stop it. And your solution was to rob me and institutionalize me, I asked. That wasn't the initial plan, Victoria mumbled. At first, we just needed to borrow some money temporarily. We thought we could repay it before anyone discovered the truth. But circumstances deteriorated, Natasha continued. The suppliers started issuing threats. They said if we didn't pay, they would target the entire family. So you decided to harm me first, I replied. You decided it was preferable to confine me like an animal than to face the consequences of your choices. Victoria knelt before my chair. Mom, we're your daughters. We love you. We just made catastrophic mistakes. You love me? I asked, feeling all the fury that had accumulated for months finally erupt. You call planning my institutionalization love? You call embezzling the wealth your father and I built together love? You call treating me like garbage at the will reading love? They didn't respond because there was no acceptable answer to those questions. But I want you to understand something, I continued, standing slowly and walking to the window. Your father loved you. Despite everything he uncovered, despite all the evidence he compiled against you, he loved you. That's why he gave you a chance to redeem yourselves. He left you $45 million, sufficient to settle all your debts and restart your lives. But he also granted me the authority to revoke it if you demonstrated you didn't deserve it. Their faces drained of color as they comprehended the magnitude of what I was saying. What do you want us to do? Victoria asked, her voice breaking. I smiled, but it wasn't a maternal smile. It was the smile of a woman who had finally discovered her power. What I want, I said, circling my two daughters kneeling on my living room floor, is for you to understand that the rules have changed. For 71 years, I have been the obedient wife, the sacrificial mother, the invisible woman who cleaned up everyone else's messes. That era is finished. I looked them directly in the eyes, one by one. Victoria, I want you to contact all your bookmakers immediately and inform them they will receive their payment, but not from money stolen from the company. They will be paid from your own inheritance. Her face fell. Mom, if I do that, I'll have nothing remaining. The debts exceed $3.5 million. Precisely, I replied, showing not an ounce of sympathy. You'll be left with exactly what you deserve after embezzling from the family enterprise for 4 years. Natasha, I continued, turning to my younger daughter, you are going to admit yourself to a rehabilitation facility. Not one of those luxury retreats where the wealthy pretend to recover. A legitimate program where they will address your addiction seriously. Mom, I can quit on my own. I don't need rehab, she protested. How well were you able to quit gambling on your own? I asked Victoria. How successfully did you stop stealing money independently? No, my daughters, addicts don't recover alone. You are going to get help, or you are going to forfeit everything. Natasha began sobbing harder. They'll destroy me in rehab. No, I said, removing my phone. They won't destroy you, because I'm going to settle your debts myself. But every dollar I pay for your obligations will be deducted from your inheritance. I dialed a number I had written down days earlier. Detective Richardson, this is Margot Chen. I have information about a prescription drug trafficking network operating through family-owned properties. Natasha went white as a ghost. Mom, what are you doing? I'm cleaning up the catastrophe you created, I replied, speaking into the phone. Yes, detective. I have names, transaction records, photographs, and my daughter is prepared to cooperate as a protected witness. I ended the call and looked at Natasha. You are going to testify against the suppliers. You are going to provide law enforcement with all the information you possess about their operation. And you are going to do it before you enter rehabilitation. They'll kill me if I cooperate, she whispered. They'll kill you if you don't pay, I replied. At least this way, you have a chance to survive and rebuild your life. Victoria attempted to stand, but I stopped her with a glance. I'm not finished with you. I retrieved the documents Bernard had provided from my bag. Did you know that your father left me controlling interest in all the family businesses? Did you know that I can legally terminate your employment immediately? Panic flooded her eyes. Mom, that company is all I understand. It's my entire identity. It was your identity, I corrected her. until you decided to transform it into your personal treasury. I showed her the financial analysis the forensic accountant had prepared. $4 million embezzled over 4 years. Fabricated invoices, irregular wire transfers, phantom accounts. This is evidence of federal crimes, but there's a path to resolve this without involving the prosecutor's office, I continued, watching hope ignite in her eyes. You are going to resign your position as Chief Operating Officer of all companies. You are going to transfer all your shares to me, and you are going to work as an entry-level employee, earning minimum wage until you have repaid every penny you stole. An entry-level employee? She asked, incredulous. You're going to start from the bottom, exactly as your father did. You're going to perform data entry. You're going to organize files. You're going to do the work that real employees do every day. And you're going to learn what it means to earn money honestly. The humiliation on her face was evident, but there was something else too. For the first time in years, she was perceiving me as more than a harmless elderly woman. Marcus, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. Margot, this is absurd. They can't accept these conditions. They're your daughters. I turned to him with a smile that could freeze water. Oh, really? And what are their alternatives, my dear son-in-law? I extracted another photograph from my bag. It was Marcus kissing a young woman in a restaurant parking lot. Should I inform Victoria about your affair with the yoga instructor? Or would you prefer to confess yourself? His face collapsed completely. Or would you prefer I tell her about the $70,000 you've been siphoning from joint accounts to support your girlfriend? Victoria stared at her husband with an expression of absolute betrayal. What is my mother talking about? Your husband, I continued, savoring every moment of his discomfort, has been stealing from you for 18 months, and he's been sleeping with Amber, the yoga instructor from the wellness center, for 8 months. Marcus started to deny everything, but I produced more photographs. Would you like me to continue showing evidence, or are you going to admit the truth to your wife? Victoria stood slowly, looking at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time. Is it true? He wept, but he didn't deny anything further. Why? She asked. Because, I answered for him. He assumed that when you inherited, he would have access to tens of millions of dollars. He planned to remain married until he had accumulated enough wealth to divorce you and take half. This can't be happening, Victoria murmured, clutching her head. Oh, but it is happening, I said, feeling more powerful than I had in decades. And we're just beginning. I extracted the final document from my bag. This is a divorce settlement my attorney drafted. Marcus is going to sign it now, relinquishing any claim to marital assets, because if he doesn't sign, all these photographs will appear in the business section tomorrow, along with evidence of his embezzlement. You can't force me to sign anything, Marcus said, but his voice trembled. Can't I? I asked, dialing another number on my phone. Hello, Amber. This is Marcus's mother-in-law. Yes, I have some very interesting photographs that I believe your husband would want to see. Marcus lunged toward me, attempting to grab the phone. Stop! He's married. His wife doesn't know anything. Precisely, I said, moving away from him. And unless you sign this divorce agreement immediately, she's going to learn everything. I ended the call and extended a pen toward him. You have 60 seconds to decide. Marcus signed the document with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. Victoria watched him as if he were a stranger. Excellent, I said, securing the signed papers. Now leave my home and never return. If I see you near this family again, I will execute my threat to contact Amber's husband. Marcus fled without another word. I was left alone with my 2 devastated daughters, sitting on my living room floor like disciplined children. Do you comprehend now? I asked them. Do you finally understand that I am not the helpless elderly woman you assumed I was? Natasha nodded, still crying. Mom, can you ever forgive us? I studied her for a long moment before responding. That depends entirely on you. If you do everything I've asked, if you genuinely recover, if you learn to be women of integrity like your father was a man of integrity, perhaps, but it's going to require years, and you're going to have to earn my forgiveness every single day. Victoria finally raised her head. Are you going to take our entire inheritance? No, I replied, and I saw relief in her eyes. I'm going to give you an opportunity to earn it. But you are going to work for every dollar. You are going to prove you deserve the name you carry. And what if we can't do it? Natasha asked. What if we're too damaged to change? I looked at her with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. Then you will forfeit the chance to know the mother you always had, but never bothered to see. I stood and walked to the window, turning my back to them. Your father left me $260 million, my daughters. Sufficient wealth to live like royalty until my final day. Sufficient wealth to help thousands of people who genuinely need assistance. You will determine whether you want to be part of that legacy, or whether you will be left on the periphery, watching what you could have had. When I turned around, they were no longer in my living room. They had departed silently, finally understanding that the balance of power had shifted permanently. The following days were the most peaceful I'd experienced in months. For the first time since Richard's death, my apartment truly felt like my sanctuary. There were no manipulative daughters appearing unannounced. No venomous sons-in-law making snide comments. No fraudulent psychiatrists attempting to declare me incapacitated. Just me, my morning tea, and the strange but liberating sensation of having complete autonomy over my existence. Victoria fulfilled her promise, contacting all her bookmakers and informing them they would receive payment from her own inheritance. Natasha voluntarily admitted herself to a rehabilitation center in the mountains. And Marcus had vanished entirely, probably holed up in some hotel while he calculated how to rebuild his life after his perfect scheme imploded. But I knew this was merely the beginning. For 48 years, I had been the wife who supported from behind the scenes. Now it was time to discover who Margot was as an independent individual, as a woman with authority, as the heir to a $260 million empire. The first decision I made was to visit all the enterprises I now controlled. I wanted to meet the employees who had worked for Richard for years. I wanted to understand precisely what my husband had built and how I could improve it. The first stop was the primary technology firm where Victoria had been chief operating officer until the previous week. When I arrived at the headquarters dressed in a charcoal pantsuit I had purchased specifically for the occasion, all the employees observed me with curiosity. They knew I was the founder's widow, but they had never encountered me in a professional capacity. "Good morning," I said to the 45 employees assembled in the main conference hall. "I am Margot Chen, and from this moment forward, I am the owner and chief executive officer of this company." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the room. "I know some of you are anxious about the recent transitions. I know you've heard speculation about financial difficulties. I want you to know that those problems have been addressed, and that this company will continue operating under new policies of transparency and integrity." An older woman whom I recognized as Patricia, the head of software development, raised her hand. "Mrs. Chen, with all due respect, do you have experience managing a technology company?" It was a fair question, and I had rehearsed the answer for days. "Patricia," I replied. "For 48 years, I sat at the dining table with Richard every evening, while he discussed every project, every challenge, every strategic decision. For 48 years, I reviewed proposals, listened to conference calls, participated in business planning. The difference is that now, instead of advising from the shadows, I will be leading from the forefront." Several employees nodded in approval. They had witnessed my dedication to the family for decades. "But there are changes that will be implemented immediately," I continued. "First, we are going to conduct a comprehensive audit of all finances from the past 4 years. I want to know precisely where every dollar was allocated." I noticed some of the accountants exchange nervous glances. They probably knew about Victoria's irregularities, but had remained silent out of fear. "Second, we will implement a performance-based bonus system, not favoritism. Third, any employee who possesses information about past irregular activities can meet with me privately without fear of repercussions to help me restore integrity to this company." I raised my hand to silence the whispers. "And fourth, the base salary at this company will increase by 35%, effective immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. Then gradually, applause began. These workers had watched Victoria squander money on designer clothes and exotic vacations while they struggled to afford childcare and mortgages. Now they had a leader who understood what it meant to labor diligently for every dollar. Over the next several hours, multiple employees came to my temporary office with information about the financial irregularities. They confirmed everything I already knew and added details that made my blood simmer. Victoria hadn't just embezzled to cover gambling debts. She had also been overcharging clients and pocketing the difference. She had sold premium software licenses and delivered standard ones, keeping the surplus and compromising client relationships. That afternoon, I visited the vineyards that had been Natasha's inheritance. The situation there was even more disturbing. The managers confirmed that for months they had been pressured to accept special deliveries that arrived in cash with no documentation. The money laundering had been so blatant that several employees had considered resignation rather than become accomplices. "Why didn't you report anything?" I asked them. "Mrs. Chen," replied Thomas, the vineyard operations manager, "Miss Natasha told us that if we spoke to anyone about the special deliveries, we would lose our positions. Some of us have families depending on us." The fury I felt at that moment was volcanic. My daughters hadn't just stolen wealth. They had intimidated honest workers into becoming accessories to their crimes. But I also discovered something beautiful during those visits. I discovered that Richard's employees were dedicated, honest individuals who had genuinely admired my husband and were willing to respect my leadership if I proved to be fair. I discovered that I possessed natural business instincts I had developed over decades without recognizing it. I discovered that when I spoke with authentic authority, grounded in knowledge and experience, people listened. And I discovered something more significant, that I enjoyed having power. I enjoyed making decisions. I enjoyed being the executive instead of the invisible spouse. That night, seated in my study, with a glass of red wine and the company's financial reports spread across the desk, I called Bernard. "How are the criminal investigations progressing?" I asked. "Extremely well," he replied. "Natalie is cooperating comprehensively with law enforcement from the rehabilitation facility. Her testimony is going to dismantle the entire prescription drug network that was operating through the vineyards. It's going to be a landmark case. And Victoria? Victoria is complying with the repayment schedule to her bookmakers. She started working as a data entry clerk at one of her own companies. The employees are, let's say, enjoying the irony of watching her perform menial tasks." I laughed for the first time in weeks. Poetic justice tasted exquisite. "But there's something else I need to discuss with you," I continued. "I want to establish a charitable foundation. I want to use a portion of this $260 million to assist elderly women who find themselves in vulnerable situations." Bernard was silent for a moment. "Women like you would have been if Richard hadn't protected you." "Exactly," I replied. "Women whose children abandon or exploit them. Women who lack resources to defend themselves. Women whom society renders invisible simply because they are older. That's a noble vision, Margot. Your husband would be immensely proud." "I hope so," I whispered, touching the photograph of Richard I kept on my desk. The days passed, and gradually I began rebuilding not only the businesses, but also my relationship with my daughters. Victoria came to visit me every Sunday after her week of clerical work. She was leaner, more humble, but also more authentic than she had been in years. "Mom," she said one Sunday, "I want you to know that for the first time, I comprehend what Dad experienced when he built all this. Honest labor has a different quality to it." Natasha called me from the rehabilitation center 3 times weekly. Her conversations were painful but honest. "I'm learning to exist without deceiving myself," she told me in one call. "It's the most challenging thing I've ever attempted in my life." Were they going to earn my complete forgiveness? I didn't know. Were they going to eventually reclaim their full inheritance? That was their decision to make. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by being someone's mother or someone's wife. I was Margot, a businesswoman, a philanthropist, a powerful woman in my own right. And that woman had ambitious plans for the future. Plans that transcended revenge. Plans that were going to transform lives, including my own. Richard had provided me the tools to defend myself, but I had chosen to use them for something greater, to become the woman I always had the potential to be, but never had the opportunity to discover. 6 months after that morning when I read that letter that altered my life forever, I found myself standing before my bedroom mirror, preparing for the most significant event since Richard's death. That evening was the launch of the Richard and Margot Chen Foundation for Vulnerable Senior Women. I was wearing an emerald dress I had selected specifically for the occasion, not because it was the most expensive, but because it was the color of growth, the color of the power I had discovered within myself. As I fastened the diamond earrings Richard had given me for our 25th anniversary, I reflected on everything that had transformed since that night I opened the tattered folder my daughters had scorned. The foundation had already assisted over 300 elderly women in its initial months of operation. Women like Dorothy, 76, whose children had depleted her retirement account and left her surviving on government assistance. Like Carmen, 70, who had been a victim of elder abuse for decades and finally found the courage to escape. Like Sandra, 78, whose family had attempted to declare her mentally incompetent to seize her pension. Every story I heard reminded me how narrowly I had avoided becoming one of those victims. And every woman we helped confirmed that I had made the correct decisions. The phone rang as I finished preparing. It was Victoria. Over these 6 months, our conversations had slowly evolved from hostility to something resembling genuine respect. "Mom," she said, and her voice sounded different, more mature. "I wanted to wish you success at the launch tonight." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by the sincerity in her tone. "How are things at the office?" "We completed the affordable software project you proposed today. Seeing non-profit organizations access our technology, I understand why Dad loved this business. It was true. I had transformed part of the technology firm into a social enterprise division. It was profitable, but it also served a purpose that filled my heart." "Mom," Victoria continued, "I know I have no right to ask anything, but may I attend the launch tonight?" The question caught me off guard. For months, I had kept my daughters distanced from my new initiatives, not as punishment, but because I needed space to discover who I was without them. "Why do you want to attend?" I asked. "Because," she said, and I heard genuine emotion in her voice, "I'm proud of you. Because I want people to know that I'm your daughter. Because for 38 years, I thought you were just my mom. And now, I realize you are Margot Chen, an extraordinary woman who happens to be my mother." Tears began streaming down my cheeks. Those were the words I had waited decades to hear. "You can attend," I finally said, "but you will come as a guest, not as privileged family. You will sit with everyone else, and you will listen to what I have built without your assistance." "Understood," she replied. "And Natasha?" "Natasha completes rehabilitation next week. If she remains sober, if she continues cooperating with law enforcement, if she demonstrates she has genuinely transformed, then we can discuss her future in the family." I ended the call, experiencing a strange mixture of hope and caution. My daughters were changing, but I had learned not to trust promises blindly. This time, they would have to prove their transformation through actions, not words. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The launch event was held in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel. Over 400 people had arrived. Business executives, politicians, social workers, and especially elderly women who had found a second chance through our foundation. As I walked among the guests, greeting and thanking them for their support, I felt more vibrant than I had in years. Not the family that had betrayed me, but the community I had chosen to build. The community of people who believed in second chances and in the dignity of elderly women. Bernard approached me with an enormous smile. "Margot, this is incredible. I've never witnessed such an enthusiastic response for a new foundation." "It's because the need was genuine," I replied. "For decades, we elderly women have been invisible to society. It was time someone acknowledged us. At that moment, I saw Victoria enter the ballroom. She was wearing a simple dress, nothing extravagant, and she walked with a humility I had never observed in her before. Several guests recognized her, and I could see the curiosity on their faces regarding why the daughter who had been disinherited was present at her mother's event. Victoria didn't attempt to approach me or claim attention. She simply sat at a table near the back and waited. When it was time for my inaugural address, I ascended to the podium, experiencing a mixture of nerves and excitement. Before me were 400 people who had come to support my vision. Behind me was the enormous photograph of Richard and me on our wedding day, reminding me where this journey had originated. "Good evening," I began, and my voice sounded stronger than I anticipated. 7 months ago, I was a 71-year-old widow who believed her life had concluded with her husband's death. I assumed my role in the world had been reduced to being the invisible mother of 2 adult daughters and the grandmother who anticipated occasional visits. But, I continued, feeling confidence surge in my chest, I discovered that life can commence at any age if we possess the courage to make difficult choices. I discovered that being elderly does not mean being invisible. I discovered that being 71 years old doesn't disqualify me from launching a new career, a new mission, a new version of myself. The applause started slowly and escalated into a standing ovation. I saw tears in the eyes of many of the elderly women in the audience. They knew precisely what I was discussing, because they had experienced the same invisibility, the same underestimation. This foundation, I continued when the applause subsided, exists because all women, regardless of their age, deserve dignity, respect, and opportunity. It exists because no woman should feel invisible or disposable, simply because society has decided her value diminishes with years. I searched for Victoria in the crowd. She was crying openly, with an expression of pride and regret combined on her face. This foundation also exists because I learned that forgiveness isn't something you distribute freely. It's something that's earned. And that second chances are powerful, but only when accompanied by genuine transformation. I finished my speech by sharing the story of an elderly woman who had come to our foundation the previous week. Her children had sold her condominium while she was hospitalized and divided the proceeds. When she was discharged, she had nowhere to reside, and her own children told her to manage on her own. That woman, I said, now has a decent apartment, legal representation to recover what was stolen from her, and a part-time position at our foundation, assisting other women in similar circumstances. Because it turns out that at 75 years old, she still had tremendous value to offer the world. She just needed someone to recognize it. When I descended from the podium, the ovation lasted for nearly 7 minutes. One after another, women approached to embrace me, to share their stories, to thank me for giving them a voice. But the most emotional moment came when Victoria timidly approached at the end of the evening. "Mom," she said, tears still fresh on her cheeks, "I want to apologize. Not just for the money, not just for the plan to institutionalize you. I want to apologize for not seeing you for 38 years, for treating you like you were merely my mum instead of Margot Chen, this remarkable woman who was always present, but whom I was too blind to recognize." I studied her for a long moment before responding. "Victoria," I finally said, "forgiveness is earned through time and actions, but respect, you've already earned that. You came here tonight expecting no special treatment. You sat in the back without demanding recognition. You cried with pride for my achievements, instead of resentment for your circumstances. That tells me that perhaps, just perhaps, you're beginning to become the woman your father always hoped you would be." For the first time in 7 months, I embraced her. Not as the mother who automatically forgives, but as the strong woman who recognizes genuine growth in another person. 1 year after that infamous morning in Hamilton and Strauss's office, I find myself seated in the garden of my apartment building. The same condominium my daughters once wanted to liquidate to confine me in a nursing facility. But everything has transformed. The garden is more beautiful than ever, because I now have time to cultivate it myself. The businesses are operating more successfully than when Richard was alive, because I've learned that leading with both compassion and strategy produces superior results than leading with ambition alone. And my family, well, my family has evolved into something I never thought possible. An authentic family grounded in mutual respect, instead of false obligations. Natasha completed rehabilitation 7 months ago, and has remained sober ever since. It wasn't effortless. There were relapses, crisis evenings, moments where I thought I had lost her permanently. But something shifted when she testified against the suppliers who had been extorting her. Witnessing those criminals sentenced to prison because of her testimony gave her a purpose that pills never could. She now works at the foundation, assisting other recovering addicts. Her salary is modest compared to what she once possessed, but she tells me it's the first income she's earned that she feels genuinely proud of. "Mom," she told me last week, "I never imagined helping other people could fill the emptiness I was trying to fill with prescription drugs." Victoria has also transformed, though her path has been different. After 1 year working as a data entry clerk at her own company, I promoted her to project manager. Not out of favoritism, but because the other employees respected her transformation. She had learned what it means to earn every dollar through honest effort. She had learned the names of all the employees, their family circumstances, their genuine needs. "It's strange," she told me a few days ago as we had coffee in my kitchen. "But I feel like I'm only now understanding what Dad built. It wasn't merely wealth. It was a community of people who depended on us to support their families." She had divorced Marcus, who had disappeared from our lives as swiftly as he had appeared. We didn't know his whereabouts, nor did we care to know. But the most significant change wasn't in my daughters. It was in me. For 71 years, I had defined my value through my relationships with others. As a daughter, as a wife, as a mother. I had never existed simply as Margot. Now, when I wake each morning, I am not Richard's widow or the mother of Victoria and Natasha. I am the Chief Executive Officer of 4 thriving enterprises. I am the founder of an organization that has assisted over 800 elderly women in reclaiming their dignity. I am a 72-year-old woman who is experiencing the most exciting and productive phase of her life. I am someone who makes critical decisions, who influences the lives of thousands of people, who builds legacies that will endure for generations. The foundation has expanded beyond my most optimistic dreams. We now have 5 shelters for elderly women who are victims of family exploitation, a complimentary legal assistance program, a vocational training center that teaches new skills to women who believed their careers were finished, and a microloan program that helps senior entrepreneurs launch small businesses. Last week, a 68-year-old woman who had been unemployed for 3 years opened her own artisan bakery with one of our microloans. When she cut the ribbon at the grand opening, she was weeping with joy because she finally felt useful, valuable, and capable again. But perhaps the project I am most proud of is the Grandmother Mentor Program. We connect elderly women with business experience with young female entrepreneurs who need guidance. It turns out that decades of life experience, of having navigated family and financial crises, of having raised families and supported husbands in building businesses, makes us exceptional mentors. The young women need us more than anyone realized, and we have more to offer than society had ever acknowledged. It's beautiful to witness how the wisdom of one generation becomes the foundation for the success of the next. Bernard visited me yesterday to discuss legal documents for a new expansion of the foundation. "Margot," he said as we reviewed contracts, "did you ever envision you would become all this?" "Never," I answered honestly. For 48 years I believed my destiny was to be invisible, that my role was to support the dreams of others without having any of my own. "Now," I said, gazing out the window at the garden where Richard and I used to walk together. "Now I understand that he didn't just leave me wealth in that tattered folder. He left me permission to become who I always could have been, but never dared to be." This afternoon, I have a meeting with the governor. She wants the foundation to partner with the state government to create a pilot program that could be expanded nationally. Assisted living programs that respect the independence of elderly women. Community centers where they can socialize and remain active without feeling like burdens on their families. Public policies that recognize that elderly women are a valuable social resource, not a problem to be concealed. The idea of influencing policies that will affect thousands of women across the nation excites me more than any inheritance I could have received. My daughters join me for lunch every Sunday, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely enjoy my company. Our conversations have evolved from apologies and resentment to authentic debates about business, about life, about the future. Victoria consults me on strategic decisions at the technology firm. Natasha discusses the challenging cases she handles at the foundation. They request my advice, not because I am their mother, but because they respect my judgment as a businesswoman and as a person. It's the family relationship I always desired, but never knew how to construct when we were younger. Have I forgiven them completely? That's a question I frequently ask myself. Forgiveness, I've discovered, is not an event, but a process. Every day that I observe Victoria treat her employees with genuine respect, I forgive her past arrogance a bit more. Every day that I witness Natasha help another recovering addict, I forgive her betrayal a bit more. But more important than forgiving them, I've learned to forgive myself. To forgive myself for being invisible for so many years. To forgive myself for accepting emotional scraps when I deserved feasts of love and respect. The tattered folder I received that day in Hamilton and Strauss's office sits on my desk as I write these reflections in my journal. It no longer contains just the account number that changed my life. Now it holds letters from women we have helped, photographs of project inaugurations, newspaper articles about the Foundation's achievements. It has become a symbol of transformation, of second chances, of the beauty that can arise from the ashes of humiliation. Every time I look at it, it reminds me that endings can be beginnings, that crises can be opportunities, and that it is never too late to become who you are destined to be. If I could travel back and speak to the Margot who walked out of that office crying 1 year ago, I would tell her, don't weep for what you have lost. Celebrate what you are about to gain. Don't lament the daughters who betrayed you. Prepare to meet the women they are going to become. Don't cling to the invisible woman you were. Liberate yourself to become the powerful woman you always had inside you. I would tell her that the pain she feels in this moment is the birth pang of a new life. And that new life is going to be more beautiful, more meaningful, and more powerful than she ever dared to dream. And to you, dear listeners, who have heard my story to the end, I ask, how many times in your lives have you accepted being invisible when you deserve to be seen? How many times have you accepted scraps when you deserved banquets? How many times have you allowed others to define your worth instead of discovering your own power? My story is not just about an unexpected inheritance or a dysfunctional family. It's about the moment we decide to stop surviving and start truly living. It's about the moment we realize that it is never too late to write a new chapter of our lives. Because it turns out that the best years of our lives can be ahead of us, not behind us, if we have the courage to claim our power and use it for something bigger than ourselves. But my story doesn't end there. Because 3 months ago, something happened that I never anticipated. I received a letter. Not from my daughters, not from Bernard or the Foundation. This letter came from Geneva. From the same private wealth management firm where Richard had hidden our fortune. The letter was formal, typed on expensive stationery, and it began with words that made my heart skip. Dear Mrs. Chen, we are writing to inform you of an additional account your late husband established in your name. This account was programmed to be revealed to you exactly 18 months after his passing. We apologize for the delay in notification due to the specific timing requirements your husband mandated. The current balance in this secondary account is 83 million United States dollars. 83 million. More. There was more. Richard had hidden even more than I knew. My hands trembled as I continued reading. Your husband left specific instructions that this account was to be accessed only after you had demonstrated your ability to manage the primary inheritance responsibly. Our firm has been monitoring your activities as per his request, and we are pleased to confirm that you have exceeded all expectations. Additionally, there is another sealed letter waiting for you at our Geneva office. Your husband requested that you read it in person. We can arrange your travel at your convenience. I sat in stunned silence, the letter trembling in my hands. Another $83 million. Another letter. More secrets. More revelations. What else had Richard planned? What else had he foreseen? I called Bernard immediately. "Did you know about this?" I asked, my voice shaking. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Margot, I suspected there might be more, but Richard never confirmed it. He compartmentalized everything. Even I didn't have the complete picture." "I need to go to Geneva," I said. "I need to know what else he left for me." "I'll arrange everything," Bernard replied. "But Margot, be prepared. If Richard went to this much trouble to hide this final piece, whatever is in that letter, it's going to be significant." 1 week later, I found myself on a flight to Geneva. Victoria and Natasha had insisted on accompanying me, but I refused. This was something I needed to do alone. Whatever Richard had left for me in that final letter, it was meant for my eyes only. The Geneva Private Wealth Management Office was everything I expected. Elegant, discreet, positioned in a historic building overlooking the lake. A senior executive named Monsieur Dubois greeted me personally. "Mrs. Chen, it is an honor to finally meet you. Your husband spoke of you with such admiration." He led me to a private room, luxuriously appointed with antique furniture and original artwork. On the table sat a single envelope, sealed with red wax, bearing Richard's initials. "I will leave you alone," Monsieur Dubois said softly. "Take all the time you need." I sat before that envelope for several minutes, afraid to open it, afraid of what new revelations it might contain, afraid of what else Richard had kept hidden. Finally, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "My dearest Margot, if you are reading this, it means you have succeeded beyond my wildest hopes. It means you have taken the tools I left you and built something extraordinary. It means you have become the woman I always knew you could be. This final gift, these $83 million, is not a test or a secret kept from you out of distrust. It is my final act of faith in you. I knew that if you managed the first inheritance wisely, if you used it not just to punish our daughters, but to build something meaningful, then you deserved this final resource to expand your vision even further. But there is something else I must tell you now, something I never had the courage to say while I was alive. I knew about the sacrifices you made. I knew about the jewelry you sold, though you told me that simply misplaced it. I knew about the double shifts you worked when I was traveling, though you pretended you were simply keeping busy. I knew about the nights you cried yourself to sleep when the business was failing, though you always smiled for me in the morning. I knew about the dreams you abandoned, the art career you gave up, the novel you stopped writing, all so you could support mine. And I was ashamed, Margot, ashamed that I let you sacrifice so much, ashamed that I built an empire on the foundation of your dreams, ashamed that I took your invisibility for granted. Tears were streaming down my face now, falling onto the paper and blurring the ink. But I didn't stop reading. That's why I created this final test. I needed to know that you would use this wealth not just to survive, but to reclaim the life you deserved. And now that you have built a foundation that gives voices to invisible women, I can rest knowing that my final gift to you will amplify that mission 1,000-fold. Use this money to expand the foundation. Use it to create art programs for elderly women. Use it to publish the stories of women who have been silenced. Use it to build the world you always dreamed of, but never had the freedom to create. There is one final instruction, my love. In the safe deposit box Monsieur Dubois will provide you, there is something I have kept for you since our first anniversary. It is the first chapter of the novel you wrote 47 years ago, the one you threw away when I told you we needed to focus on the business. I rescued it from the trash and saved it all these years. I think it's time you finished writing it, with all my eternal love and profound regret for the dreams I cost you. I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. For 47 years I had forgotten about that novel. I had buried that dream so deep I convinced myself it never mattered. But Richard had saved it. He had kept it all this time. Monsieur Dubois returned with a small safe deposit box. Inside, yellowed with age, with 32 pages of manuscript. My handwriting from decades ago. My words. My dream. I read the first page and was transported back to the 24-year-old woman I had been, full of ambition and creativity and hope. The woman who had wanted to write stories that mattered. The woman I had forgotten existed. I spent 3 days in Geneva, reading and rereading that manuscript, remembering who I had been before I became someone's wife, someone's mother. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to grieve for the dreams I had sacrificed. But I also allowed myself to feel something else. Possibility. When I returned home, my daughters were waiting at the airport. They had been calling constantly, worried about me, but I hadn't answered. I needed that time alone to process everything. "Mum, are you okay?" Natasha asked, studying my face. "You look different." "I am different," I replied, and I was. In those 3 days in Geneva, something had shifted inside me. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. I called an emergency meeting of the Foundation's board of directors. "I have an announcement," I said. "We are expanding our mission." I outlined my vision: art programs for elderly women who had abandoned creative dreams, writing workshops for women who had stories to tell, publishing opportunities for voices that had been silenced, scholarships for elderly women who wanted to return to school. "And there's one more thing," I said, feeling my heart race with a mixture of fear and excitement I haven't felt in decades. "I am going to write a book. It will be my story, but also the stories of all the women we've helped. It will be about reclaiming dreams at any age, and all proceeds will go to the foundation." The board erupted in applause, but Victoria raised her hand. "Mum, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What changed in Geneva? You left here as one person and came back as someone else." I smiled. "I discovered that your father gave me more than money. He gave me permission to reclaim the parts of myself I thought were dead. He gave me permission to be more than just his widow or your mother." Over the next 6 months, I worked on my novel every morning. The story poured out of me. 47 years of observations, experiences, and wisdom, finally finding their voice. It wasn't the same book I had started writing as a young woman. It was better, richer, deeper, because of everything I had lived through. My daughters read the drafts and wept. "Mom," Victoria said after finishing the first complete manuscript, "I never knew you had all this inside you." "I didn't either," I replied honestly. "I had forgotten it was there." The book was published 10 months after my return from Geneva. It became an unexpected bestseller. Not because of my name or Richard's legacy, but because it resonated with thousands of women who saw themselves in my story. Women who had made themselves invisible. Women who had sacrificed their dreams. Women who believed it was too late to reclaim their lives. The book tour was exhausting but exhilarating. At every event, women would approach me with tears in their eyes, thanking me for giving them hope, for showing them it was never too late. One evening, at a reading in Chicago, an elderly woman raised her hand during the question and answer session. "Mrs. Chen," she said, her voice shaking, "I'm 83 years old. I gave up painting when I got married 60 years ago. Is it really not too late for me?" I looked at her hopeful eyes, at the dreams she had carried silently for 6 decades, and I felt Richard's presence beside me. "It's not too late," I said firmly. "It's never too late. The question isn't whether you're too old. The question is, do you have the courage to reclaim what's yours?" 6 months later, that same woman sent me a photograph. She was standing in an art gallery next to her first solo exhibition. She was 84 years old and finally living the dream she had abandoned. My daughters have become my partners in the Foundation's work now. Victoria oversees the business operations. Natasha runs the addiction recovery programs. And I am the creative director, developing programs that help women reclaim their artistic voices. Last week we launched a new initiative, a film project documenting the stories of women over 70 who had reinvented their lives. Victoria is producing it. Natasha is directing it. And I am writing the script. We are building something together, not out of obligation or guilt, but out of genuine collaboration and mutual respect. The tattered folder still sits on my desk, but now it's surrounded by other things, copies of my published novel, photographs from the Foundation's events, awards and recognition I never sought, but deeply appreciate. And in the center of it all, framed in silver, is that first page of my novel from 47 years ago. A reminder of the dream that never died, just waited. This morning, as I sat in my garden, writing the final chapter of my second novel, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Mrs. Chen," a woman's voice asked. "Yes? My name is Jennifer Hamilton. You don't know me, but my grandmother was Rose Hamilton, the attorney who read your husband's will." My heart skipped. Rose Hamilton had passed away 6 months ago. "I'm calling because my grandmother left specific instructions in her own will. She wanted me to contact you after her death." "Why?" "Because she wanted you to know the truth. She wanted you to know that she tried to warn your husband about your daughter's plans. She told him they were preparing to have you declared incompetent. That's why he created all those safeguards. But there's something else, something she felt guilty about her entire life." I gripped the phone tighter. "What is it?" "She knew your daughters were planning to institutionalize you before your husband died. She had evidence, but professional ethics prevented her from telling you directly. She's been carrying that guilt for years, watching you suffer at that will reading, knowing what was coming, but unable to warn you. Before she died, she made me promise to tell you how sorry she was. She said you deserved to know that at least one person in that room was on your side, even if she couldn't show it." I felt tears welling up. All this time, I thought I had been completely alone in that conference room. But Rose had known. She had tried to protect me in the only way she could, by helping Richard prepare his defenses. "There's one more thing," Jennifer continued. "My grandmother also left you something in her will, a letter she wrote but never sent. I can mail it to you if you'd like." The letter arrived 3 days later. "Dear Margot, if you are reading this, it means I'd have passed, and my granddaughter has fulfilled my final request. I need you to know that I have admired you from afar for many years. Your grace, your strength, your quiet dignity in the face of your family's disrespect always moved me. I am sorry I could not do more to protect you. I am sorry I had to read that will, knowing what pain it would cause you. But I am not sorry for helping your husband create the means for your liberation. Richard came to me 3 years before his death, with concerns about your daughters. We worked together to build a legal structure that would protect you, while appearing to benefit them. Every document, every account, every safeguard was carefully designed to give you power while hiding it from those who would exploit you. He loved you more than you knew, Margot, and he trusted you completely. I hope you have claimed the life he wanted you to have. I hope you have become the woman he always knew you were. With deep respect and admiration, Rose Hamilton." I sat with that letter for a long time, understanding finally that I had never been as alone as I thought. Richard had protected me. Rose had protected me. Even Bernard had been part of a carefully orchestrated plan to ensure my liberation. And now, 2 years after Richard's death, I was living a life beyond anything I had imagined. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just existing, but creating. Not just rich, but fulfilled. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community, so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Yesterday, I received an email that made me laugh out loud. It was from the organizers of a major women's empowerment conference. They wanted me to be their keynote speaker. Me, Margot Chen, the invisible woman who had been handed a tattered folder and dismissed by her own family. Now I was being invited to inspire thousands of women about reclaiming their power. I accepted immediately. My daughters helped me prepare the speech. We sat together in my living room, 3 generations of wisdom coming together. Victoria shared insights about overcoming addiction to success and achievement. Natasha talked about the humility required for genuine transformation. And I wove it all together into a message about second chances, about invisible women becoming visible, about dreams deferred but never truly dead. On the night of the conference, standing backstage waiting to be introduced, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From that devastating morning in the attorney's office to this moment of triumph. From feeling worthless to understanding my immeasurable worth. From being defined by others to defining myself. The introduction began. Please welcome Margot Chen, author, philanthropist, and founder of the Richard and Margot Chen Foundation for Vulnerable Senior Women. The applause was deafening. I walked onto that stage, not as someone's widow or someone's mother, but as myself. Fully, completely, unapologetically myself. Good evening, I began, and my voice was strong and clear. 2 years ago, I was handed a tattered folder and told it was my inheritance after 48 years of marriage. My daughters laughed. My son-in-law mocked, and I walked out of that office, believing my life was over. I paused, letting the words sink in. But what they didn't know, what I didn't know, was that my life was just beginning. Because inside that tattered folder was not an ending, but a beginning. Not a dismissal, but an invitation. Not a mockery, but a prophecy. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. I stand before you tonight, worth more than $340 million. I stand before you as the CEO of multiple successful companies. I stand before you as a published author, a philanthropist, and a woman who finally, at 72 years old, discovered who she truly is. It's measured in the 800 women whose lives have been transformed through our foundation. It's measured in the dreams reclaimed, the voices amplified, the invisible made visible. I looked out at the sea of faces, women of all ages, all backgrounds, all with their own stories of invisibility and dreams deferred. If there is one message I want you to take from my story, it is this. It is never too late. It is never too late to reclaim your power. It is never too late to pursue your dreams. It is never too late to become who you were always meant to be. The world will try to make you invisible. Your family might dismiss you. Society might discount you. You might even make yourself invisible, sacrificing your dreams for others, burying your voice to keep peace, accepting crumbs when you deserve feasts. But I am here to tell you that you are not invisible. You are not disposable. You are not too old, too late, too anything. You are powerful beyond measure, and it is time you claimed that power. The applause started slowly, then built into a thunderous standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. Women were crying, cheering, embracing each other. And in that moment, I understood the true gift Richard had given me. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the evidence or the legal protections. It was the mirror he had held up, forcing me to see myself as he had always seen me, powerful, capable, extraordinary. After the speech, hundreds of women lined up to speak with me. Each one had a story. Each one had dreams she had abandoned. Each one needed permission to reclaim her life, and I gave it to them. The same permission Richard had given me. It's not too late, I told each one. Your story isn't over, it's just beginning. One woman, who must have been in her 80s, gripped my hands with surprising strength. I wrote poetry when I was young, she said, but I stopped when I got married. My husband said it was foolish. Is your husband still alive? I asked. No, he passed 5 years ago. Then why are you still letting him silence you? I asked gently. She stared at me, tears streaming down her face. You're right. Why am I? Start writing again, I told her. The world needs your voice. 3 months later, I received a slim volume of poetry in the mail. It was her first published collection. She was 86 years old. The dedication read, "For Margot, who reminded me it's never too late. These are the moments that make everything worthwhile. Not the money, not the recognition, but the ripple effect of one woman's liberation inspiring another's, which inspires another's, creating waves of change that spread farther than I can see. My foundation has grown beyond anything I imagined. We now operate in 12 cities across the country. We've helped over 1,500 women. We've published 3 anthologies of their stories. We've created art exhibitions, film festivals, and music programs showcasing the creativity of women over 65. And the most beautiful part, my daughters are leading this expansion. Victoria, once the gambling addict who tried to institutionalize me, now runs our financial empowerment programs, teaching elderly women how to protect themselves from exploitation. Natasha, once the drug addict who conspired against me, now directs our addiction recovery initiatives, using her own story to inspire others. They have not just changed, they have transformed. And in doing so, they have given me the greatest gift of all. A genuine relationship based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and authentic love. Last month was the 2nd anniversary of Richard's death. My daughters and I visited his grave together. It was the first time we had gone as a united family, rather than fractured individuals. We brought flowers, his favorites, white roses, and we each spoke to him. Victoria went first. Dad, I'm sorry I disappointed you. I'm sorry I didn't see what you were trying to teach me, but I want you to know, I finally understand. And I'm spending the rest of my life making you proud. Natasha was next. Dad, you saved my life by forcing me to face my addiction. If you hadn't done what you did, I would be dead by now. Thank you for loving me enough to hold me accountable. Then it was my turn. I knelt beside the headstone, touching the engraved letters of his name. Richard, I said softly, thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Thank you for believing in me when I had stopped believing. Thank you for giving me not just wealth, but wings. I am flying now, my love. I am soaring, and I am taking thousands of women with me. As we walked back to the car, Victoria put her arm around me. Mum, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think Dad knew? Do you think he knew it would all turn out this way? I thought about it for a moment, about all the careful planning, all the strategic safeguards, all the hidden resources revealed at precisely the right moments. Yes, I said finally. I think he knew exactly how it would unfold. He was playing chess while we were all playing checkers. And his final move, his masterpiece, was liberating me to become who I was always meant to be. He was a genius, Natasha said, quietly. No, I corrected her. He was a man who loved me enough to give me what I needed, rather than what I wanted. I wanted security. He gave me freedom. I wanted comfort. He gave me challenge. I wanted to be taken care of. He gave me the tools to take care of myself and others. That night, sitting in my study working on my 3rd novel, I received an email from a woman in Australia. She had read my book and wanted to start a similar foundation in Sydney. Could I provide guidance? I smiled. The ripples were spreading farther than I had imagined, crossing oceans, reaching women I would never meet, but whose lives would be changed nonetheless. I wrote back immediately, offering not just guidance, but partnership. Within weeks, we had established the international branch of the foundation. Within months, we were operating in 4 countries. Within a year, we were global. And it all started with a tattered folder that my daughters had mocked. That folder now sits in a museum exhibit about women's empowerment, on loan from my personal collection. Beside it is my published novel, the poetry collection from the 86-year-old woman, photographs of the women we've helped, and a video loop of success stories. The exhibit is titled, The Invisible Made Visible, How One Woman's Story Sparked a Movement. Last week, I was interviewed for a major news program about the Foundation's work. The interviewer asked me, Mrs. Chen, looking back, do you regret any of the sacrifices you made during your marriage? I thought carefully before answering. I used to, I said honestly. I used to resent every dream I abandoned, every opportunity I missed. But now I understand that those experiences gave me something irreplaceable. Empathy for other women who have made similar sacrifices. If I hadn't walked that path, I couldn't guide others along it. So no, I don't regret it. I honor it as part of my journey. And what would you say to women who are currently in the position you were in 2 years ago, feeling invisible, undervalued, believing their best years are behind them? I looked directly into the camera, knowing that somewhere, someone who desperately needed to hear this was watching. I would say, your story is not over. The chapter you're in right now, the painful one, the difficult one, is not the final chapter. There are pages yet unwritten, dreams yet undreamed, adventures yet unlived. Do not let anyone, including yourself, convince you that you have nothing left to offer. You are not too old. You are exactly where you need to be to begin again. The interview went viral, My inbox was flooded with messages from women around the world, women in their 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s, saying they had been inspired to pursue long-abandoned dreams. A 92-year-old woman in Japan started painting again. A 75-year-old in Brazil learned to play the guitar. An 80-year-old in South Africa started a business. Each one credited my story with giving them permission to try. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories to you. But perhaps the most meaningful message came from an unexpected source. It was an email from Jessica, Marcus's ex-wife, the woman whose affair I had exposed to facilitate Victoria's divorce. "Dear Mrs. Chen," the email began. "You don't know me beyond the worst moment of my life. I am the woman whose infidelity you exposed. I wanted to reach out to say thank you." I was stunned. "Thank you? For destroying her marriage?" You see, the email continued, I was in a toxic relationship, trapped by my own poor choices, living a lie. When you exposed the truth, it was devastating. But it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I had to face who I really was and decide who I wanted to become. I went to therapy. I examined my patterns. I understood why I had made such destructive choices, and I started rebuilding my life on a foundation of honesty rather than deception. Today, I am in a healthy relationship with a wonderful man who knows my whole story and loves me anyway. I have a career I'm proud of. I have self-respect I never had before. And it all started the day you held up that mirror and forced me to see the truth. So thank you, Mrs. Chen. Not for being kind. You weren't kind. You were ruthless. But thank you for being honest. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the harsh truth they need to hear. I sat with that email for a long time. Jessica was right. I hadn't been kind. I had been strategic. Ruthless even. But in being willing to be the villain in her story, I had inadvertently become the catalyst for her transformation. It made me think about Rose Hamilton, who had helped Richard prepare my liberation, even though it meant I would suffer at the will reading. Sometimes love isn't soft and gentle. Sometimes love is hard truths and difficult choices. Sometimes the people who care about us most are the ones willing to let us struggle, to let us suffer, to let us discover our own strength. Richard had loved me that way, by leaving me that tattered folder, by forcing me to face my daughter's betrayal, by putting me in a position where I had to fight for myself rather than being protected. He had given me the greatest gift, the discovery of my own power. I wrote back to Jessica, thanking her for her message, and inviting her to consider volunteering with the foundation. If her transformation was genuine, she could help other women navigate their own difficult transitions. She accepted, and 6 months later, she became one of our most effective counselors, using her own story of deception and redemption to help women trapped in similar patterns. The foundation continues to grow. We're now in 20 countries. We've helped over 3,000 women. We've published 5 books, produced 2 documentaries, and created an online platform where women can connect, share resources, and support each other's dreams. But the work I'm most proud of is the quietest. It's the individual women whose lives change in ways no one else sees. The 70-year-old who finally leaves an abusive relationship. The 65-year-old who goes back to school. The 80-year-old who publishes her first book of recipes, preserving her cultural heritage for future generations. These small, private victories, they are the true measure of our success. My daughters and I have become genuine partners now, not just in the foundation, but in life. We have family dinners every week, not out of obligation, but because we genuinely enjoy each other's company. We have honest conversations about difficult topics. We hold each other accountable. Victoria recently came to me with a confession. She had been feeling the urge to gamble again. The stress of her divorce, the pressure of her new role, it was triggering old patterns. "I need help, Mom," she said, tears in her eyes. I thought I was past this, but I'm not. I held her while she cried, proud of her for having the courage to ask for help rather than hiding the struggle. We found her a therapist who specialized in gambling addiction. We adjusted her workload to reduce stress. And most importantly, we talked about it openly, removing the shame that had kept her addiction secret for so long. 3 months later, she's doing better. She attends support groups regularly. She has accountability partners. She's learned to recognize her triggers and ask for help before she acts on them. This is the real work of transformation, not the dramatic moments, but the daily choice to show up honestly, to ask for help, to keep choosing growth even when it's hard. Natasha has had her own challenges. Last month, she relapsed. She took pills she found in an old coat pocket, pills she had forgotten were there. She called me immediately, terrified and ashamed. "Mom, I messed up. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I drove to her apartment and sat with her through the night, monitoring her, making sure she was safe, and just being present. "This doesn't erase all your progress," I told her. "Recovery isn't linear. What matters is that you called me. What matters is that you're not hiding it. What matters is that tomorrow you get back on track." The next day, she checked herself back into outpatient treatment. She was honest with her support group. She didn't let the relapse define her, and she kept moving forward. These are my daughters now. Not perfect, but honest. Not without struggles, but willing to face them. Not the entitled women who tried to institutionalize me, but humble warriors fighting to become better versions of themselves. And I am so proud of them. This journey has taught me that transformation is possible at any age, in any circumstance. But it requires 3 things. First, it requires truth. You cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. My daughters had to face the truth about their addictions, their choices, their actions. I had to face the truth about my invisibility, my complicity in my own erasure. Second, it requires courage. The courage to make hard choices, to disappoint people, to be the villain in someone else's story if necessary. The courage to start over, to try again, to risk failure. Third, it requires grace. Grace for yourself when you stumble. Grace for others when they struggle. Grace to forgive without forgetting. To move forward without erasing the past. Today, as I sit in my garden, writing the final words of my 3rd novel, I am filled with gratitude. Gratitude for Richard, who loved me enough to set me free. Gratitude for my daughters, who have become women I genuinely admire. Gratitude for Rose Hamilton, who protected me from the shadows. Gratitude for Bernard, who guided me through the legal complexities. Gratitude for the 3,000 women whose lives have been touched by the foundation. But most of all, gratitude for myself, for having the courage to open that tattered folder, for having the strength to fight back, for having the vision to build something bigger than revenge. The tattered folder started as a symbol of humiliation, but it became a symbol of liberation. It became the catalyst for a movement that is changing lives around the world. It became the beginning of my true story. And that story is far from over. Because at 72, I am just getting started. I have more books to write, more women to help. I have a world to change, one invisible woman at a time. So to you, dear listener, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever age you are, I leave you with this. Your story is not over. The best chapters may still be ahead. The dreams you abandoned are not dead, just dormant. And it is never ever too late to become who you were always meant to be. Open your tattered folder, claim your inheritance, and change the world. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing that transformation is possible. Thank you for being part of this community of women who refuse to be invisible. This is Margot Chen, signing off. But remember, I'm not ending anything. I'm just beginning. And so are you.